And Mika join us now from Washington National Cathedral ahead of the funeral a short time from now from the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. Guys, good morning.
Good morning. A beautiful and very, very cold day here in Washington, where former President Jimmy Carter will be laid to rest this morning following a week of state funeral events in Washington and the state of Georgia. President Biden has declared today a national day of mourning. The 39th president has been honored by lying in state inside the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. At 9 a.m., Carter's casket will depart the Capitol for Washington National Cathedral, where his funeral service is expected to begin at 10 a.m. this morning. President Biden will deliver a eulogy in honor of Carter, something he asked of Biden before his death. In attendance will be First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, as well as Vice President Kamala Harris and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff. All living former presidents are also expected to attend, as are many former First Ladies and First family members. Country stars Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood will sing Carter's favorite song, Imagine, a performance he requested before his death. The two became friends with the Carters through their work together with Habitat for Humanity. Following the service at the National Cathedral here, Carter will be brought back to his hometown of Plains, Georgia, where a private funeral service will be held. A private burial will follow, and Carter will then be laid to rest on the grounds of his home beside his late wife of 77 years, Rosalind. A Navy flyover will conclude the national ceremonies. This morning's funeral services for Jimmy Carter mark an end to a series of events honoring the former president that began nearly a week ago. On Saturday, January 4th, President Carter's motorcade made a brief stop at his childhood home before continuing on to Atlanta for a moment of silence at the state capitol. A private service was also held Saturday at the Carter Center in Atlanta, where the former president established a library and headquarters for the family's organization. Carter laid in repose at the center until Tuesday to give visitors an opportunity to pay respect. According to the Carter Center, more than 20,000 visitors came to honor the 39th president, many driving through the night just to have a last moment with their president. On Tuesday, Carter made his final departure from the Carter Center, traveling to lie in state in Washington. Upon arrival, Carter's motorcade made a stop at the U.S. Navy Memorial, and then his casket was transferred to a horse-drawn military wagon as part of a procession to the U.S. Capitol. Vice President Kamala Harris and other congressional leaders eulogized Carter during a service on Tuesday, praising his work in office, his faith, and his volunteerism, his service. Carter has been lying in state in the Rotunda, where crowds of mourners have lined up in freezing temperatures to pay their final respects. Joining the conversation we have here at the National Cathedral in Washington, Rogers Chair in the American Presidency at Vanderbilt University, historian Jon Meacham, Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, and Pulitzer Prize-winning author and presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin. It's good to have all of you, and thanks for being in the cold with us.
Thank you, John. John, your thoughts today about the passing of the 39th president?
I think President Carter would appreciate, this point, which is moments like this are not just about the person being laid to rest, but they're about us. And American presidents in particular are both makers and mirrors of an era. And I think one of the things, to what Mika was just reporting, one of the things that I think brought people, so many people, to take pains to pay tribute to someone who was president 44 years ago is a hunger in the body politic for a sense of service over self.
Yes,
and Doris, bipartisan tributes coming forward for President Carter, not only this morning, but throughout the week. This morning in the New York Times, Peter Baker talking about a close relationship that formed during Anwar Sadat's funeral in 1981 between Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter, sort of friendship between old rivals that we seldom see today. Talk about that and whether we are saying goodbye to an era with Jimmy Carter or whether he offers guidance for where we need to go in the years to come.
Or both.
Oh, how I wish we could follow that guidance, as you say, and just use this moment where we've seen bipartisanship. Just at the memorial service the other day when the Speaker, Mike Johnson, spoke and when Senator Thune spoke, there was a sense of really understanding the example that Carter had set as a decent man, a man who served, a man who had the country involved more than himself. You know, I think these friendships, they matter so much to us. I've been lucky enough to moderate conversations between Bush Jr. and Clinton, and the audience just is so heartwarmed to see the two of them laughing with each other, knowing there had been tension before when Clinton had beaten George Bush Sr., and then the friendship between George Sr. and Clinton as well. Bush used to tease that it seemed like he was the mother of another brother, that somehow the brother of another mother, in other words. So that I think we all yearn for this, and I think watching this ritual that we've seen in these last days, I'm so glad that Carter chose a big state funeral. You know, it was partly a combination of a private funeral at home and then going back home. But in the middle, a week-long history has been so exciting. I've loved listening to the biographers. I've learned so much about Carter that I didn't know. It's an important time when history is diminished in so many places. And I think choosing that big state funeral allowed the ritual. Think about what a state funeral is. It's sort of the reverse of an inauguration, which is going to be coming. It's saying farewell. The inauguration is saying we're coming. And those are institutions that provide stability and continuity, and I think it's been an extraordinary thing to watch.
Yeah, certainly. It feels like such an honor to be here. Senator Warnock, President Carter and his family had a long-time relationship with your church. You're senior pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And if you could talk about the significance between the church and the Carter family and you.
Well, thank you so very much. It's wonderful to be here with you. As you point out, President Carter had an amazing and long-term relationship with the people of Ebenezer Baptist Church. This is a man who had served in the governor's mansion, and when he decided to run for president, there were folks who weren't so sure about this southern white governor. Remember, at a time when we were just coming out of the civil rights movement, black folks certainly needed some assurances about where he stood. And it was Martin Luther King Sr., Daddy King, as he was affectionately called, pastor of our church, who met with Carter, determined that he was all right, put his arm around him, and the rest is history. Let me just pause. I would be remiss if I didn't say that my heart goes out to the people of Los Angeles as they're dealing with this terrible devastation. Lots of people have died. A lot of folks have lost everything. President Carter created FEMA in 1979. This is our collective goodwill from all of us. Whenever any one of us is faced with this kind of disaster, we need to summon that goodwill in this moment. We are all Americans. We're all Los Angeles. I think that's the spirit with which President Carter did his work, and we need it right now.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, Mika, as we've heard the story of how when Pope John Paul II met with Jimmy Carter, he said it was more like two leaders of faith coming together than a religious leader and a political leader. I'm wondering, you've known the Carter family since you were very young, and you all remained close. And you've talked about that faith and that morality and how that drove so much of what he did in office and in personal life.
Drove his decisions, and sometimes, you know, some would say that other things might have needed to drive decisions at the time. At the same time, he was such a good man, and the bond with my dad was real. They both felt like outsiders to Washington in their own different way. Jimmy Carter coming from the South, my dad a refugee of war coming to America. And they both were similar in age compared to others in the cabinet. The National Security Advisor was the first cabinet-level position in the Carter presidency. And they worked out together. They often had these memos that they sent to each other as jokes, just to sort of lighten the energy and during really tough times. And also, he was so mindful of family and connections. When my dad was sent to Cairo for an assignment, Carter sent him off to Cairo. My dad was going to miss my brother Mark's, I believe it was his confirmation at St. Luke's Church in McLean, Virginia. So President Carter offered to step in and represent my dad at St. Luke's. My mom said no. She said that would create a fight, like everybody else wouldn't. But then he wrote my brother a letter about it. He was just, they were fully connected, about family and about their relationship, working together, even when they didn't agree. And that was something Carter welcomed.
Right. And Doris, as the one who wrote Team of Rivals, there's a picture of Jimmy Carter and Dr. Brzezinski jogging. And Carter writes in the caption, "It's big, one of the few times we were in step together." And I will tell you, reading through Dr. Brzezinski's diaries it's amazing that he lasted 4 years only because he was constantly pushing and prodding Carter, constantly disagreeing, constantly challenging him. And it's unbelievable. That's actually why Jimmy Carter kept him around, because he appreciated the honesty, and how remarkable that is in a leader. And we do not see that often enough in the White House.
Oh, you're so right. I mean, only a confident person can surround themselves with people who can question their assumptions and argue with them day after day. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt luckily had Eleanor Roosevelt, who he considered a welcome thorn in his side, always willing to argue with him. It's great to have that on a daily basis. You know, it's interesting to know who these people feel as their heroes. As you know, Joe, in many ways, I think Carter valued Truman more than anyone. He thought Truman was the greatest president in the century of the country. And I think it was because Truman never ducked an important issue for public opinion. Truman listened to other people. Truman never really wanted to become wealthy. Truman had that kind of simple personality that he responded to. It's interesting to think, however, how different Truman decided to have his ceremonies. He went through this whole state funeral planning, 600 people, you know, thousands of soldiers involved. He said, no, I want a simpler affair. I just don't want to be in Washington. I don't want to be lying in state. I don't want to be at Arlington. I want to be home in Independence, Missouri. And then he quipped, it's so wonderful, Truman's sense of humor. He said, I want to be buried near my library so that I can wake up in the morning and go there if I have some work to do. So it's interesting to see that Carter combined the simplicity of Truman by starting in planes, going back to planes, but having this big state funeral in the middle, which, as I said before, I think it's just given us a chance to hear stories about him, one story after another, that makes us understand even more than we knew at the time what an extraordinary figure he was.